So, once upon a time, I set out to make a video about the plummeting trajectory of the Cinderella story film series, but I wound up deciding that there wasn't a point. Because, that was the whole thesis. I used to like these, and now I don't. Oh, what's up with that? I do have thoughts as to what is up with that, which we will surely get to, but the point is that it didn't occur to me until recently that I could enrich in the idea by simply adding more Cinderella. Lord knows there's plenty to go around, and I've discovered ranking stuff is my passion. In fact, comment below what else you'd like to see me rank. My ideas include every Final Destination death, every Black Mirror episode, and every Nicholas Sparks movie. Originally, by the way, I did intend to rank every Cinderella retelling, but I settled for 45 because that was a more approachable number. Rodgers and Hammerstein might have taught me that impossible things are happening every day, but I couldn't possibly identify every Cinderella retelling, let alone consume them all. I did try my best. I mean, I've been watching up to 5 Cinderellas a day throughout February, and that's after having axed episodes of non-anthological television from my list. If you're curious how I didn't go broke renting movies and doing so, it wouldn't have been possible without the help of Atlas VPN, my personal fairy godmother, who this video is brought to you by. As you should know, a VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and I most frequently use mine to trick streaming services like Netflix into letting me access content that's not available in the US, where I live. Big Brother Canada is coming up, eh? Some of my own videos are blocked in specific areas, but you can work around that with Atlas VPN. Freedom from geo restrictions might also save you a pretty penny, as prices may vary across borders, but you didn't hear it from me. Really, it's most important to use a VPN for security, though. The last thing you want is to get your identity stolen within the next 3 years and look back on this moment wishing you had just clicked the link in my description to take advantage of the huge deal Atlas has going on right now. For a limited time, you can get a 3-year subscription for just $1.99 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. That's the best price on the market to protect an unlimited number of your devices from malware without sacrificing loading speed. Remember where I told you the link was? In the description. Very good. You're smart. I respect that about you. Anyway, it's difficult to break down my various rhymes and reasons for including or discluding the Cinderellas I did. First, I stuck to Grimm-inspired versions in the English language because that's the horse I have a race in, and it was an easy way to scale back the magnitude of this project. Then I decided on a case-by-case basis when it was or wasn't enough for Cinderella herself to be a smaller part of a larger story. Into the Woods? Yes. Shrek the Third? Not quite. Happily Never After? Unfortunately. Avengers Grimm? Probably not. I looked forward to including Sneakerella before it was postponed. I added Not Cinderella's Type to my list because somebody on Twitter told me to, and one movie I removed from that list because I couldn't for the life of me figure out where to watch it. I did, however, read the novel it was adapted from. Yes, books are also involved. In an effort to only include the most relevant of them, I sought out those with over 50,000 ratings on Goodreads, and I only broke that rule twice to pursue smaller stories I had personal interest in, which is totally fair because I also neglected one that did meet my qualifications out of a lack of personal interest. All in all, I just want you to know not to notify me of Cinderellas you're aware of that I failed to mention. I either made the executive decision to ignore them or haven't ever heard of them, but either way, it's too late now, and I can assure you that I do not care. That's disclaimer 1. Disclaimer 2 is that while nearly everything I discuss on this channel is, of course, subjective, I find my rankings to be extra subjective. My aim isn't to declare what's best, it's to confide what's my favorite. And as such, I do not fight my innocuous biases. I'm particularly fond of my nostalgia bias. I like to keep her close. No more disclaimers, but one more thing. Just like I did when I ranked every Scooby-Doo movie, I polled my patrons to find out their favorite Cinderella retellings. I'll let you know as we reach their top 4, which won't be until we reach my top 8. They're smart people, my patrons. 4, by the way, because that's how many received more than one vote. But here's where the lonely votes lie. Without further ado. Not to be dramatic, but I would rather die than watch this again, and I mean that. With confidence, I am telling you that Cinderella of the year 2000 has dethroned both Mean Girls 2 and The Nut Job to become my most hated movie of all time. The disdain I have for it is vitriolic in nature and all-consuming, and the worst part is that I fear I'm alone in my hatred. Firstly, because hardly anybody's seen it, but secondly because while consensus among those who have isn't altogether positive, it is not negative enough. Where are my haters at? I'm seeing a lot of, at least it swung for the fences. It's true that it's a unique interpretation in which Cinderella's name is Zazola, her fairy godmother is a mermaid, and the time period is ambiguous. But at what cost? If the price we must pay for creativity is all sense of good taste, we shan't purchase. I can't explain what it's like to watch what should be titled Zazola. You wouldn't understand unless you have. Whether they know it or not, I have a trauma bond with everyone else who's ever seen it. I should start a support group. The best I can do is show you a couple of unedited bits out of context and hope you don't think I'm being unfair.
See why people do this. Bit of a turn on, yeah?
She took a life for pleasure.
You know, I've never been to the mountains.
Never been.
Hilarious as they are, those clips don't necessarily convey the depth of my displeasure. You might gather from them that it has a case of the so bad it's goods. I wish that were true, and it very well could have been, if it weren't for the incestuous vibe.
I just wondered if you have everything that you need.
Sit down. Reggie, it occurs to me
She's an innocent who'll have to be
corrupted.
Tell me, if this was your pick to make fun of with friends for movie night, at what point would you turn it off and apologize for making it weird? I kid you not. 10 minutes into Cinderella of the year 2000, I paused it to make sure I hadn't accidentally confused it for the literal pornographic film Cinderella 2000, which I distinctly remembered leaving off of my to-watch list for obvious reasons. I think it's mainly the music that worried me. Well, that and the unnecessary moaning.
I thought it might please you.
The weirdest part of it all is seeing actors I actually recognize in a movie so fundamentally incompetent and off-putting. I thought Lucy Punch had only donned the role of an evil stepsister twice, and oh how I wish I still lived with such blissful ignorance. Speaking of fundamental incompetency, if you've seen Elle, a modern Cinderella tale, I imagine you find it hard to believe that Cinderella of the year 2000 could possibly be worse. Rest assured, it is, but I don't blame you for doubting my judgment, hypothetical person. The bottom two is just that bad. This time, I won't attempt convincing you with scenes. Instead, I want you to look at this poster. Take your time. Ogle it, and dare tell me you think there's a chance in hell the movie it represents is any good. I rest my case. I swear, you don't need any more information. Released 2 years after Another Cinderella Story, this wanted what that had, almost as much as its own successors do, but Elle, a modern Cinderella tale, didn't even have the decency to be half as watchable as the worst of those. My apologies to Chad Dylan Cooper. To the best of my recollection, which is shaky because the mere act of paying attention to the magic riddle was taxing, it's a sort of lesser amalgamation of all the fairy tales Disney couldn't copyright. Cindy is the main character, which is why it counts. I found I hated it similarly to how I hated my lowest ranked Scooby-Doo movies. There's a certain brand of haphazard animation for babies that forces my brain off as a means of protecting me from truly experiencing it. I'm left with only faint flashbacks. Her dress was made of snow. There were musical numbers. And not the good kind.
Sisters, sisters, no one can resist us.
The truth is that I was preoccupied baking a pie during it, but to be fair, I was baking pies all throughout my binging experience because it's a new hobby of mine. I'm getting quite good at it, and it didn't stop me from processing any others. Perhaps I plainly hate it, and maybe that's fine. in which Cinder comes back from the dead to murder all those who wronged her. I never quite know what to make of schlocky low-budget horror like this. Is it above reproach? I didn't go into Cadaverella anticipating anything much more or less than what I got. At the same time, knowing something's divine purpose is to be bad doesn't make it any better. Ultimately, this ranks lowly because I didn't enjoy myself watching it. And isn't that the point? I wish it didn't take itself so seriously, and I felt it was a little too male-gazy even before the topless dance sequence. There is a kill in it I appreciate for utilizing unconvincing but super gross practical effects. I would show it to you, but I don't want to get demonetized, and even though I honestly do like it, part of me wishes I'd never seen it myself. Ella Cinders is one of 2 silent films on the list, and I was grateful I had them to compare because my preference for the other must mean that I don't dislike this one for being silent. Though, based on nothing but what I gathered from the silent film unit we did in the video productions class I took in high school, I do think Ella Cinders is more representative of the era. It reminds me of the Charlie Chaplin movies we watched, at least. All shenanigans all the time. I don't want to disrespect the history of the art form, but I don't think I would have been a moving pictures kind of gal in the 20s. I'm not a historical film buff now, anyway, partly because the further you go back, the less likely you'll avoid encountering something offensive. Case in point, the red face in this movie. Something I've discovered in all this is that Prince Charming is a pretty easy character to get right. He's meant to be a stand-up guy is all. Don't get me wrong, I can totally appreciate when he's written with weaknesses to overcome. The issue with If the Shoe Fits is that they totally forewent giving him strengths.
Bring me every beautiful girl you can find. I want big ones, fat ones, small ones, tall ones. Did I say fat ones? No fat ones.
Rob Lowe is a vapid fashion designer who learns at the last minute, mind you, that looks aren't everything when he chooses to be with the ugly shoemaker over the beautiful model.
They're the same picture.
It's just annoying because I can think of many romance conventions that call for the guy to start out a bit of a jerk, but Cinderella is not one of them. Believe it or not, I didn't go in to Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister aware that it was written by the same guy who wrote Wicked. Honestly, I didn't know Wicked was a book at all. I haven't listened to it in full, but I did audition for one of my elementary school musicals with Popular. The only other number I know is Defying Gravity, and that's thanks to Glee. I am at least vaguely aware of it being a reimagining of The Wizard of Oz, just like this is a reimagining of Cinderella. One would have you believe that the big twist is telling the story from an ugly stepsister's point of view, but the real twist is making the story boring. I do apologize if this isn't the most intellectual take I've ever had, but my primary issue with this novel is that it bored me to tears. I spent an entire day listening to the audiobook willing it to be over. If I had to pinpoint why, I think it's because the entire thing felt like a first act. It doubles as a retelling of Cinderella and a prequel to Cinderella, which results in the first 75% or so reading like exposition before the main event is unsatisfyingly tacked on to the end. It's partly my fault actually for appraising it as a Cinderella retelling, because even though it definitely counts, that is not what it is. It doesn't operate within the framework of Cinderella as we know it, which I found frustrating because the entire appeal of An Ugly Stepsister's perspective to me is unpacking why she mistreats Cinderella, but Iris, the main character, straight up doesn't. I'd have preferred if Gregory Maguire wrote an entirely original story about some ugly chick without insisting it be inspired by Cinderella. First of all, happily never after. Spelt like this would have perfectly sufficed, but they both added an apostrophe and capitalized the E, more like happily ever after. Even if I adored this movie, it would have been demoted to this exact placement just for that. And I might not adore it, but I did expect worse. There was at least one joke I liked. It shot for Shrek and landed among mockbusters. For those uncultured, the famed Cinderella story series is 6 films deep as of last year. I'm of the belief that the quality of the first 3 decreased linearly and then mysteriously flatlined. I couldn't bear separating the last 3 because to me, They're triplets. I mean, the most recent one recycled a whole stepsister. At the very least, I used to be able to count on my Cinderella stories to feature a fresh cast. Wasn't that the whole idea? To scoop up Disney Channel's latest ingenue, sign on a comedic genius, and pick a heartthrob. Any heartthrob. As a franchise, I'd compare it to Bring It On, because the first one was only meant to be a standalone, but the powers that be are determined to keep pumping them out forever, however irrelevant they become. The difference is that the tie that binds the Bring It On movies is cheerleading. Plain and simple. You can tell all sorts of stories about cheerleaders. Cinderella, on the other hand, is a more limiting starting point. They really go the extra mile to make them indistinguishable too. Like, a Cinderella story and another Cinderella story weren't all that similar apart from including the necessary ingredients, but the others have massively taken after the latter. Selena Gomez was a dancer-singer, so Lucy Hale was a singer-songwriter. Sophia Carson was a triple-threat theater actress, Laura Moreno was also a songwriter, and Bailey Madison was a triple-threat film actress. I sincerely hope the next one is a circus performer. I can only count on new entries to change in one respect, and that's in becoming a little less like Cinderella each time. Given the monotony, there's an argument to be made in favor of this evolution, but it perturbs me. They seem to have decided all that's required is an evil stepfamily and some sort of reveal regarding Cinderella's identity. Twice that's entailed her living a Hannah Montana-esque double life, and once it was a spin on Cyrano. But in Christmas Wish, she's always dressed as an elf until she isn't. In all fairness, other movies on this list have utilized the same tropes. The aforementioned shoemaker model also got the best of both worlds, and in the Hallmark movie coming up, Cinderella fed her stepsister lines through an earpiece, just like in Once Upon a Song. These tactics are useful for developing the romance without jumping the gun on the happy ending, but at least outside of this series, they still bother with the other odds and ends that make Cinderella Cinderella. They've stopped bothering with stand-ins for the glass slipper, the fairy godmother, or the ball. The most recent one hardly resembles Cinderella at all. It also somehow managed to be more incestuous than Cinderella of the year 2000. I did not think that would be a contest, but here we are. I was more surprised to find only one Hallmark retelling of Cinderella than to realize it took place over Christmas. It was never going to be good enough to break the bottom tier, but it did place highly within the bottom tier because there was an emotional argument near the end that actually got to me, and my fundamental problem with Hallmark movies is that they rarely get to me. When I greenlit this video in my mind, I had every intention of ranking 2021's Cinderella last. This was before I had even seen it, but it's not like it was better than I expected. It's exactly as annoying as I thought it would be, and everyone else said it was. But it is at the very least competent. It's a real movie. I couldn't, in good faith, rank it any lower. I'd sooner rewatch it than anything else we've talked about so far. I don't know why I'm defending myself like I didn't rank it 33rd out of 45. What I hate most about it, you've likely already heard from someone else. You see, this day and age, a big-budget Cinderella needs to justify itself being made with a twist. The only exception I can think of is Disney retelling it plainly in 2015, and even they were on thin ice in doing so. The angle this film went with was infusing girl boss feminism into a story that was never inherently anti-feminist. If you think of Cinderella as a heroine who waits for a man to save her, I'm afraid you've mistaken the actual tale for the i5/play/cheetah Girls song. The Take has a great video about this common misremembering, which I think 2021's Cinderella was born of. Ella must refuse the prince because she's on that daily grind, and princesses can't engage in the free market. The prince must abdicate to be with her, allowing his sister to take the throne, because women can be monarchs too. It's also radical. I mean, what's next? Female landlords? Anyway, what I hate second most about it is that it's a jukebox musical which doesn't pull from a particular artist, or at least genre, or time period. What even is this soundtrack? This is one of the two books I didn't have to include but chose to. The other one is next. I was curious because it was written by Julie Murphy, author of Dumplin', which I haven't finished, not because I don't like it, but because I got busy in the middle of reading it and now I'd have to start over. I love the movie. I was meant to love If the Shoe Fits too. As much as a Bachelor-like reality show is the perfect setting for a Cinderella retelling, a better book with a fat lead about a Bachelor-like reality show exists in one to watch. I couldn't help but compare them. In If the Shoe Fits, she's a contestant, and in this one, she's the Bachelorette, but that's not the key difference. The key difference is that this one has conflict, perhaps too much conflict, and the other does not. If the Shoe Fits might check every box it takes to be considered a Cinderella retelling, but it goes out of its way to suck the meaning out of each and every one of those elements. Stepwomen, shoes, a ball, they're all here, but almost as if only to pay homage. What's most damaging to the thematic content is that Cindy and her stepfamily get along swimmingly. I do think this was a well-intentioned alteration because the original tale does stigmatize blended families, but if the mistreatment wasn't going to come from them, it had to come from somewhere. In this video, I'm dealing with full-on Cinderella adaptations, but keep in mind the idea of a Cinderella story being shorthand for an underdog coming out on top. That turn of events is more important than anything else, and this novel neglected it. Somebody replied to my 2-star rating of this one on Goodreads asking if it was still worth reading because they'd meant to, and I couldn't figure out how to respond. I mean that literally, like I couldn't figure out the function of replying to comments on Goodreads because it's a broken hell site, but if you're watching, read it. This is one of just 3 items on this list with a black main character, and the only gay one. The last thing I want to do is take eyes away from it specifically, but anything really. For future reference, my opinion of art is no more valuable than your own, so allow yourself to form one. That being said, I cannot lie and say I like Cinderella is Dead. I sure thought I would, much like If the Shoe Fits, but now I think I'm just too old to buy into what this book tried to sell me. I'd call it a dystopian fantasy, which takes place in the future of Cinderella's universe, where her story has been used to oppress the women of the kingdom. Girls are taught that if they follow Cinderella's example, they might get wifed up at the ball, but if they fail to be picked, they'll suffer great consequences. Immediately, you gather that the world of this story is an allegorical representation of our own, right? After all, we too live in a patriarchal society. Women really are socialized to be preoccupied with landing a husband, and majorly thanks to our representation in media, which includes the Disney princesses. All of these commonalities, though, are what make this story's revision of Cinderella so annoying. When the main character discovers that Prince Charming was a terrible abuser all along, and that Cinderella never actually wanted to be with him, you can't help but feel like your worldview is supposed to be shattering along with hers, but it won't because our Prince Charmings that we grew up with are fictional and far from immortal fascists. Another problem is that I don't even believe her worldview is as shattered as the text suggests. From the moment the story begins, Sophia has the mindset of a total 21st century girl. Everybody around her is constantly flabbergasted by her bold suggestions that women should have rights. She questions aloud, I think multiple times, whether the Cinderella story they're taught is historically accurate, and then the second she finds out it isn't, she acts all shocked and distraught about it. I meant to complain about the romance being uninteresting as well, but I have to move on eventually. One sentence critique of the central relationship. They're the same character. I feel like if you go on to watch Not Cinderella's Type, you're gonna judge me for letting it get this far. It's not good. And I know that. It's a cringy, poorly made Christian feature that hardly resembles Cinderella at all. Yet somehow, it charmed me. There's something refreshing to me about how seriously it handles the abuse Indy, is her name, suffers at the hands of her guardians. I'm used to the evil stepwomen and their downfalls being played for laughs, but the second half of this movie takes great pains to validate Indy's trauma and depict responsibly how one in her position and those around her should realistically behave.
Look, my dad's a family therapist and he sees this stuff all the time, and the problem with abusive people is that they just always think they're right.
You think they're abusive?
Yeah. Look, I think that you need to come with me.
Can I have time to think about this?
Actually, Do you mind if I call my dad and just ask for his advice?
That after-school special vibe permeates throughout the romance as well. If you're somebody who dislikes love triangles for their usual toxicity, I recommend this one between Indy, her longtime best friend, and Prince Charming, all of whom are always 100% honest about their feelings and totally understanding of each other's.
I want to hang out with you as friends, and maybe more one day.
I want to be your boyfriend.
I will be your friend regardless, okay?
But what about Maxton?
I think you should give him a chance. But I do hope you realize that I still want a chance to.
You know I want to be your boyfriend. What do you think?
Can I just have some more time to think about it? I don't want to rush into anything.
Yeah.
Watching Not Cinderella's Type is like free therapy, I swear. And I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to help placing it even higher if it weren't for the low production value and two very specific plot elements. The first is that the inciting incident entails the love interest running over and killing the main character's cat. And the second is that Indy winds up being fostered by her boyfriend's family. And she does stay in the pool house, but I think we have to add another tally to the incest counter. At last we have advanced tier, and given this is the middling one, expect less thorough explanation moving forward. Perhaps even after we reach the top tier, because I'm more inclined to justify disliking something than liking it. Anyway, I went in to Cinderfella severely doubting it wouldn't find a way to be misogynistic, but halfway through I was pleasantly surprised, looking forward to being proven wrong. That was until...
Oh, the Cinderella legend has brought nothing but dissatisfaction to the hearts of women. And their husbands have taken the brunt of it. The unhappy husbands of the world are crying for help. They're crying for a chance to get even. So you are the one who is going to settle the score for all the downtrodden married men. And when we finish, the married men of the world will be able to look their wives in the face. That is if they have their makeup on. Why wasn't I lucky like Fella? He's not handsome. He's not tall. He's not clever. But he ended up married to a beautiful princess instead of you. The men will be able to get even for centuries of female abuse.
Why couldn't it have just been a Cinderella, but he's a boy? Why did the explicit purpose of his story have to be punishing all women? Whatever, despite this, Cinderella's virtues still stand. The acting style of Jerry Lewis unsettles me, but I do respect it, and it does fit in with the surrealism of this film. I love the set design for its visual storytelling, mainly this long table. It made me very sad how lonely he was at that table. I also appreciate Princess Charming. I'd like to advocate for more gender-bent or gay Cinderellas because I do enjoy the two Princess Charmings we have. I think they're neat. This is a children's cartoon. I suppose I enjoyed it as much as a 23-year-old woman could. It's a Latino version, which is nice. I like her dress. I had a laugh when the geckos got to singing.
Life is so sweet when you are along the green iguana.
The thing about fairy tale theater is that they didn't perform folk tales with a twist, because they normally performed folk tales less often retold than Cinderella. Personally, I used to watch the Tale of the Frog Prince VHS at my grandma's house. So while this is a perfectly respectable version of Cinderella, there's nothing all too interesting about it. The prince, however, did amuse me.
I was just giving you a little signal.
Oh, no. Goodbye.
This is the other silent film, and what I liked most about it was its enchanting music, but I don't think that music is inherently attached to it. Musicians used to play live along to silent films, but regardless, I first experienced it with that score, which makes it real to me. I'm also just generally more charmed by this one than the other, despite there being whole sections of it that I can't comprehend. I enjoyed myself anyway, trying to figure out what the women were doing in the forest or whatever. Half of The Glass Slipper is a beautiful ballet, and what I wish is that the entire thing was, because the other half is just another Cinderella, except she's a dislikable child pusher. I feel like I can just insert my Letterboxd review here. As a chronic completionist, I had to include all of these children's Cinderellas, but I'm not sure what to say about them. It was Cinderelmo. Cinderelmo indeed. Applause for Cinderelmo. Now this is Cinderelmo for grown-ups. I'm kidding, but the storyteller is a Jim Henson production, more reminiscent of Labyrinth than Sesame Street. I respect it so much for its creativity and style, but ultimately the Cinderella episode, titled Sap Sorrow, is too short to place much higher than this. In it, Cinderella accidentally betroths herself to her own father by trying on a ring meant only to fit his future queen. Don't worry though, we don't have to break out the incest counter because the idea is that they're so disturbed by the thought that she goes into hiding as a furry servant until a prince shows up to fall in love with. He's kind of a jerk though. I do not like him. First Love earned points with me for including something very few of these do, which is Cinderella being misled to believe she will be allowed to attend the ball before getting the rug pulled out from under her at the last minute. So often she's just outright told she can't go, but there's something so much more tragic about this turn of events. It hurts my feelings for her. Aside from that, it's pretty standard. Part of the appeal is supposed to be that the lead actress sings beautifully, and she does, but I couldn't understand a word of it. I have a love-hate relationship with Once Upon a Song, and as such, I'm going to give you a pros and cons list. Pro, there are 2 songs in it that I'm kind of obsessed with to the point that I would say I prefer its original soundtrack to Another Cinderella Stories.
I've got rings on my fingers and glitter in my hair. I bought a one-way ticket and I just got here.
Don't break my heart before I give it to you. Don't tell me no before I ask you to.
Con, this was the entry to the series that broke its naming pattern, and I resent it for that. They could have kept going. A third Cinderella story, the next Cinderella story, an extra Cinderella story, an additional Cinderella story, one more Cinderella story, and so on and so forth. Con and pro, the film grossly exploits Indian culture by giving the stepmother the quirky, funny habit of cultural appropriation, but I do like the reveal that the meditation guru she hired is secretly an American bro lying for a check.
Don't hate me. Okay, don't hate me. I'm sorry, but my name ain't Ravi. It's Tony.
Tony?
From Jersey.
From Jersey?
I am half Indian.
Like, can you believe a Cinderella story, Once Upon a Song, got there before The Good Place? Pro and con, there's real effort put into establishing the motivations Grace Bowman has for, let's call it, stealing Lucy Hale's voice.
I'm nervous about tonight. Oh my god, why did I just tell you that? Why are you nervous? You're not really singing. All you have to do is stand there and look pretty. Have you ever thought about how that makes me feel?
And because of this humanization, I wrongfully assumed she would be one of those stepsisters with a redemption arc. Instead, the last we see of her, she's running off of stage after suffering the public embarrassment that Miss Hale wanted to protect her from moments earlier.
It was your voice the whole time. Bev never sang at all.
And she's about to not sing for a whole bunch of people.
I think the ending would have been significantly more satisfying if Grace had had a change of heart and unveiled Lucy herself. I never win. I don't want to talk about this one. I really don't, because the problems other people have with it appear to stem from them being fans of the stage musical, which I am not. I don't dislike it, I just don't know it. The stage musical isn't any of my business. The movie is my business, but I don't want to throw my hat into the ring of opinions uninformed. Here's what I'll say. I love the first half, but I hate the second half. And if that's because the themes of the second half were better explored on stage, that's for you to know, and me never to worry about from this moment forward. After the Ball is okay. I liked the beat. I very nearly refused to rank Cinder on account of the fact that I haven't yet checked out the rest of the series, and it isn't itself conclusive as a standalone. I was told on Twitter that the Cinderella retelling bits end with this one, and while I have no reason to believe that's not true, I shouldn't have assumed that meant it would end in a satisfying place. I'm trying not to hold the fact that I'm dangling off of the edge of a cliff against it, because it is the first of a series, and that's fair enough, but doesn't the first of a series usually end on a high note? Maybe that's more a rule for trilogies. Whatever, I'm trying to say that it's difficult for me to assess a story that isn't complete. I enjoyed myself, but what if it goes majorly downhill from here? All I know for sure is that I love this cover so much. I probably would have picked this up in its heyday if this had always been the cover, but then I wouldn't have read it during a pandemic, which is serendipitously tragic. Nick wanted a piece of that Cinderella story pie, but they did have the decency to mix it up a little by gender bending it. I can't shake the feeling that this would have broken the top tier if I had only seen it as a kid. This was my first time seeing it, and I thought it was cute. Rags, though, is the worst stage name ever, right? Are we all on the same page about that? I feel obligated to like these more than I actually do, especially the original. It's just that they're essentially generic Cinderellas, but with music. Music that I heard for the first time in the 1997 version, which I'm partial to. In every version, I do hate the Prince is Giving a Ball song, though.
The prince is giving a ball! The prince is giving a ball!
What's the prince giving? Could you tell me again? This barely missed out on the top tier because it's more like a sampling of what could be a Cinderella cartoon series than a movie. It features 3 little independent looks at Cinderella's happily ever after. In one of them, Jack wishes to be human and discovers he makes a better mouse. In another, Cinderella struggles to acclimate to royal life until she decides that she has to be herself about it. And in my favorite, Anastasia falls in love with a cute little village baker. I love it because I had the DVD as a kid. I warned you about my nostalgia bias. She's my friend. I did take note of something new in my rewatch though, and that's Charming's perpetual absence. Of course, he literally only had 1 line in the first movie, but back then he was just an idea. It's a little concerning that even now that they're married, he's nowhere to be found. And I bet you'd thought you'd seen the last of Jim Henson's influence on this list, but we'd yet to run into Kermit the Frog. And here he is a side character in what is a thoroughly funny iteration of Cinderella.
I'm sorry for what I said, Kermit, but I had to give you some hint not to reveal who I am.
You call Shut Up Frog a hint?
Cindy was made in the 70s but takes place in 40s Harlem and stars an all-black cast. Much like Hey Cinderella, what I love most about it is its affinity for comedy. It's hilarious.
There lived a young girl whose name was Cinderella. This is a ripoff of that story.
There's more to appreciate here though. Most notably, outside of a few oddballs like Happily Not Ever After, Cindy is the only retelling on this list to dare pair Cinderella up with somebody other than Charming. Believe it or not, she ends up with her fairy godmother stand-in, who's her neighbor, Michael. They totally pulled it off though. I ship these two. And it's impressive to me how ahead of its time this film was to poke fun at the trope that is marrying someone you just met.
Cindy, will you marry me?
Oh, well, Captain, I'm grateful that you asked me, but I need time to think it over.
No, you don't.
I mean, I should consider all this very carefully.
No, you shouldn't.
Did I mention it was a musical? As if you needed more convincing, it was a delight. I also do think it's nice and comforting that while Cindy is initially mistreated by her stepwomen, they do all end up a happy blended family. Her dad isn't dead either, so she has somebody in her corner the whole time. Let me know if I'm off base here because I'm about to touch on how I think race influenced this version, but I took note of the innocence of it and the fact that Cindy's brand of mistreatment doesn't resemble the servitude it usually looks like. I mean, the version of Cinderella most widely recognizable in America, at least, is found in the 1950s Disney film. This was before the civil rights movement of the 60s, the era of the help, and here's blonde Cinderella scrubbing the floor. To white audiences back then, the tragedy wasn't just that she was an indentured servant, but specifically somebody who ought not to have been. This critique could extend into matters of class as well, because I think part of it is also the idea that her stepmother's fortune and home are Cinderella's birthright. In so many of these retellings, she spends time with other servants, and it always gives me pause. Like, wait a minute. It's fine that they're servants, but not her. Relevance to Cindy, though, is that I think there's solace in its tendency towards what is wholesome. Like Cindy, The Slipper and the Rose is a musical, but in a more epic fashion. Epic is the word I would choose to describe the film if I could only choose one, and that's why it's up here. The appeal of this version over others to me, despite it rarely deviating from what you'd expect in plot, is the scale of it all. There are comedic beats thrown into the mix, but for the most part, The Slipper and the Rose takes itself more seriously than anything else we've discussed. It's all grandeur and drama. Thumbs up from me. I won't waste much time talking about An Offer from a Gentleman because I've discussed it before on my channel when I reviewed every Bridgerton novel. This is the third book in that series, my second favorite, and the sibling for which it stands is Benedict. It does confuse me that it's the only fairy tale retelling to grace the series it's a part of, but I'm not mad about it because I do prefer the template of Cinderella to the template of Bridgerton, which I broke down in aforementioned video. Yeah, just go watch that if you haven't and you're curious. A Twist in Time has developed a bit of a cult following because Charming is just radiant in it.
Oh, hello. Am I in the right room? Of course I'm in the right room. But you're about to be married! Oh, but the talking mice say she's the wrong girl.
I forbid you to take another step down these stairs!
Okay.
He is indeed an icon, and he is a major reason why this place is so highly, but altogether, this is balls to the walls creative for a straight-to-video Disney sequel. Madame Tremaine steals the fairy godmother's wand to turn back time and make Cinderella unrecognizable to the prince. The weirdest part is that the original timeline isn't restored by the end of the movie, which makes the way Cinderella and Charming get together here their canon. My only critique is that I don't appreciate Anastasia's relationship with the baker being erased. She has a redemption arc similar to what I wanted from Grace and Once Upon a Song, but I feel that plot should have been given to Drusilla. Then they'd both be nice now, and isn't that only fair? To be honest, I don't think the only reason I find this to be the superior version of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella is because it's the one I saw first. What I think is that Whitney Houston and Brandy really added something special to the music.
Impossible for a plain yellow pumpkin to become a golden carriage.
It's just that much better, isn't it? It's also the best example of colorblind casting in its purest form because it's colorblind down to genetics. This is his dad and this is his mom. Any questions? I thought not. I don't blame my patrons for tying it at third place. I realize that it's hotly debated whether this or A Cinderella Story is superior, and for a lot of people I think it depends on which one they grew up with. The age I am, I grew up on them both, so I feel like I have some authority here. I'm right and you're wrong. Kidding. But if you must know, the critique I do have of Another Cinderella Story is that it ends halfway through. It's very strange to me how early on in it Joey Parker discovers Mary's identity. The whole second half of the movie is basically a sequel. A new conflict appears out of thin air, but it's not as if it's unentertaining. The structure doesn't have to make sense. It just has to work. And maybe it does. You know what else works for me? This. But you already knew that. This scene alone is the reason I couldn't place Another Cinderella Story lower than 7th place. I actually wish I disliked this, because it is unnecessary and self-indulgent on Disney's part. I can't help that it's good though. I'm not to blame. It's the fault of Lily James, rather. Lock her up. She can't keep getting away with making everything awesome. For a while now, I've been meaning to make a video in defense of disloyal adaptation, and these two are the perfect case study because they are both great, but so different. My older sister, an elementary school teacher, literally reads Ella Enchanted to her students and then watches the movie with them to learn about comparing and contrasting or something. I'm sure most people who've read the book prefer it as established by my patrons, ranking it first, but the nostalgia bias is strong with this one. Only God can judge me. This probably is a hot take, but my preferences between this book and movie play tug of war. They have opposing strengths and weaknesses. I could talk about it for ages, but the gist is that I find the original to be cute and comforting, where the adaptation is fun and dramatic. Char and Ella of the book were friends before they were lovers, but Char and Ella of the movie start out with one-sided beef. In the book, Ella worries that certain terrible things will happen that actually are made to happen in the movie, like unfriending Arita or being ordered to kill Char. The world of the book is whimsical, while the world of the movie is political. Much respect to them both, that's all I have to say. A classic is a classic. I haven't seen this since I was a little girl, and I didn't anticipate placing it third. You forget when you know how it goes so well that it was as sharply executed as it was, that despite your familiarity, it will keep you on the edge of your seat. It will provoke feeling in you. Of course, I'm mainly referencing the scenes which actually advance the plot. Literally, half of this movie consists of Lucifer chasing the mice around. Gus Gus is totally an icon, but as an adult watching, I was more appreciative of the A-plot than I used to be. Madame Tremaine is genuinely foreboding and scary in the way that she's lit and framed. Cinderella's lowest moment is actually painful to watch. The few scenes that actually feature Charming manage to sell you on the romance through visuals and music alone, because that man doesn't talk. This was only my second time watching Ever After, and I would like to publicly apologize, especially to my patrons who tied it for third, for failing spectacularly to appreciate it the first time. I say that like I hated it, which I didn't at all, but you don't understand what a breath of fresh air it is, smack dab in the middle of an epic Cinderella binge. I think it became one of my favorite movies in experiencing it this way because I was grateful for it. Its quality kind of does laps around everything else. The costumes, the cinematography, the acting, the twists and turns, the romance, the comedy. Thank you, Drew Barrymore. You were there when I needed you. I hope not to offend my mother by saying A Cinderella Story raised me. This movie is a part of me, which means that if you disagree about it being the best Cinderella retelling, you're insulting me, personally. My patrons who placed it second are the only people exempt from this. Obviously, I'm exaggerating here, but I do truly love this movie in a way that is unreasonable and hard to explain. I can't spell out its virtues for you because it's so ingrained within my very soul that it's not a movie anymore. It's a memory. I was there. If I wanted to, I could critique it. Its flaws are right there in front of me, close enough to touch. But I won't. My channel is not the place for critiquing A Cinderella Story. Rather, it's a place of worship. Jennifer Coolidge is the false idol we bow to.